Okay, welcome to Making the Most of Critique Groups. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a panel discussion, and we hope it'll be informative for you. I'm Kriti, and I'll be moderating this session. We'll spend about an hour talking to the panelists about critique groups. After that, I will present your questions to them. Feel free to type your questions in the chat. Sit back and enjoy the discussion. Don't worry about taking notes, as we will be sharing the video and a blog post with all the content available for you in the coming days. Let me introduce our panelists first before we head into the questions. Dakota runs an online Facebook critique group called Write It and Write It. I think you can figure out which one's the right and the right. And has been writing, critiquing, and editing for over 10 years. They've also founded Inked in Gray along with Sam Hale and Shia Ballard. They will have a short in the first Stain, the upcoming anthology to be published by Inked in Grey. They're currently working on a speculative fiction novel based on true events titled The Lessons We Keep. Ariana first learned the art of critiquing in 2007 as part of a post-secondary fiction course. She's been tutoring, providing peer reviewing, beta reading, critiquing, and editing fiction since then. She's currently querying a superhero origin story called Gifted and working on a dark fantasy retelling of an old Ukrainian folktale full of rage, monsters, and love.
Cool.
SK runs an online critique group and has experience with participating in online critique groups of various styles. She's been beta reading and critiquing since early 2015. SK writes science fiction and fantasy and has published 2 novels thus far, a fantasy titled Windward and an epic fantasy called Between Starfalls. Sam is the organizer of a hybrid in-person and digital critique group. He has been a writer, critiquer, beta reader, and editor since 2014 and is currently working on a historical fantasy novel set during the Third Punic Wars titled The Lions of Carthage. Okay, you can correct me on that one. You can read 2 of Sam's short stories in the upcoming anthology, The First Stain, published by Inked in Grey. Sam enjoys cats, and yoga mats. You'll find social links for all our panelists in the chat, and I'll dive right into the questions. So, because this is about a critiquing group, here's the biggest question. What is a critique group, and why bother joining one?
So really anybody who is looking to improve their writing is somebody that can benefit from a critique group. It's not enough to write though, because if you don't want to improve, it doesn't matter how much you write. A critique group's just not going to help you if you don't want to improve your skill. You have to be able to go into it with the willingness to work on all the issues and the humility of knowing that there's going to be a lot of issues that will be found. All ability levels will benefit, but it's not a place for you to just shout about how great you are as a writer.
And I think too, I've found, I've been a member of several different types of groups. And I think what's important is to kind of, when you're looking for a group, to identify what it is that you are actually looking for, because we've got support groups. Like I'm in several groups where we don't even share our writing. We share the experience of being an author, the pain of querying or marketing or whatever we're going through, right? And so that's very different from I've been a part of some groups where they do just kind of want to share and brag about what they created, and everybody wants to sit around and pat each other's backs, and that's fine too, especially if you're writing for pleasure or to release stress or anything like that. But mostly I think today we're all talking about kind of what SK was nodding to, is that actual critique group where the intent is to improve your writing and to be more marketable. I think that's mostly the goal of a critique group, is because better is such a, I mean, what does better mean? Different people like different things, right? But to make it something that's more appealing to more people.
And definitely when you're going into a critique group, you have to assess what the goals of the other individuals in that critique group are. Some can be hobby writers, so they're less concerned about what works and what not. Sometimes they may have different time scales, and they also may have different skill levels. So the the best critique group will have somebody, or at least one person in the group who is better than you and one person in the group who is not. And the reason for that is you can all learn off of each other, and you can all support each other and level up and grow together. You also, if you're going to join a critique group, know that you have to have a kind of a thick skin. um, Creating a little bit of distance between you and the work that you're bringing is also beneficial, because everybody is going to have a different opinion about your work. They're going to critique it honestly, and that's at least the goal. And that may not agree with what you think you're trying to say while you're writing. Um, Going in with knowing that everybody has a different style. So if you're willing to go into a group with all of that in mind, then you will get the best experience out of joining one. Um, but definitely go in looking at each group and the expectations they have. So what you will get out also is what you will put in.
And I think
Absolutely.
that kind of springboarding off what you're saying too is that if you go into a critique group with this idea that you've already got a perfect book and you just need someone to go through and do some copy editing for you, and once you inevitably start getting critiques back and people are saying, well, I just didn't get it, this part doesn't work, etc., and then the retort is, well, you guys just don't get it. You don't get my style. You don't know how I work. And you just, instead of developing that thick skin, you just bug off and go to another critique group hoping for someone to just wholeheartedly accept your book. Then you're just bound to fail one group after another. So developing that thick skin and essentially lowering your expectations to a certain degree is one of the better ways to enter into a critique group.
Absolutely.
Cool. Moving on to my second question. How does someone critique effectively and critically?
So I like to preface that my group is kind of a hybrid. So we have the in-person and the digital. So Dakota and myself are in that group. I am the organizer for it. And what we decided to do, well, I decided to do after a lot of experience with less than stellar writing groups I've been a part of, was I was going to organize it into two parts, which is the first part. Everything is on Google Drive. The critiques and submissions are on Google Drive. And then we would read everything ahead of time. And then once we'd had time to digest whether we were being critiqued or the ones doing critiquing, aka the critter, everybody had enough time to digest everything. So we do meet every Sunday, and then we sit down, having had all that time to look over the critiques from people. Hopefully we get them sooner than later, and then we go from that point on. So how to effectively critique someone takes a lot of practice. I've found it is a skill. One of the things I try and look for, it's really important to me, is to have context. Like, I want to know what kind of book you're going to be writing. Is it going to be high fantasy? Is it hard science fiction, YA, etc., that sort of stuff. I may not know everything about those genres, but if you tell me that this is going to be an MG book and I'm gearing it towards this kind of audience, there's not going to be any profanity or anything like that. Or conversely, you're writing something more like what I'm more into, where there's a lot more action, violence, it's a little bit grittier. That helps me really couch my critique because I know where you're coming from and my expectations have already been set up. And then I kind of look at everything from micro and macro kind of perspectives. So I start small with my critiques. I try and understand, especially with somebody I'm new to working with, I try and understand their style, their prose, like how they go about writing. And then I kind of zoom out as I continue to get more and more submissions from them. I can start to say, what's the timeline? What's your roadmap for this work? What do you think it's going to look like? And I just keep zooming out while maintaining that kind of micro perspective throughout. One of the things I think is really important, though, and this is more on the not the critter, but the critique, those being critiqued, is deciding what to divulge, like what you're going to tell the people who are reading your story. And it's one thing I always try and point out after one or two sessions with somebody when I suspect maybe a plot twist is coming up, is saying to them, you decide what you want to tell us. Because one of the things about, say, a big plot twist is, if I know that, you know, in chapter 12, there's a plot twist and you've already told me what it is, then you've robbed yourself as someone who's making this submission of the opportunity to see how your reader's going to react to it. So I always tell the authors in my group, you decide what to tell us. And that really helps me give a better critique, because I want to be surprised the same way when I pick up a New York Times bestseller. I want to be surprised in the same sense. But that's kind of the process. We do this digital and to person method, but the actual critiquing of itself, when we're sitting down or we're typing the critiques, I use a teacher and we do a compliment sandwich, which is, I really liked this one part. This middle portion here needs a bit of work. And then this third part here can be reiterating what worked at the beginning or another thing that you can improve upon. And another way I just kind of refer to it is just saying, have one in the chamber, which is to say, if you've got a critique for somebody, whether it's in person or you're critiquing their work digitally, don't just say, I really didn't like, there's a lot of blocking in this part of your action scene. It's really easy to say there's a problem, but part of being an effective writer is coming up with solutions.
Yes.
And I've found over time that the harder you work your brain to fix those solutions, it all gets dumped into your own writing. So not just having critiques, but having solutions, I think, is one of the best ways to become an effective and critical critter.
Yeah, I agree with basically everything that that you just said, Sam. When you're in critique, you're there to improve, like we have already pointed out, and that means that it can be very painful, because if you're still chasing the myth of the perfect page where there's nothing to improve upon, there's no red marks, there will be a rude awakening. And that's something that I see a lot, and it's something that I struggled with for a long time too. So I get it. When I'm critiquing somebody, or when I'm trying to help somebody improve how they're critiquing, I don't really think of it as a compliment sandwich, though I like that idea. I more just think of it like a ratio. So, you know, I start seeing that, okay, there's a lot of issues here. So I'm going to throw in a lot of compliments for whatever I see that's working. I really want everybody to come away from critique motivated to work on all of the many, many issues that we've noticed. And it kind of depends on the person too. So if you have somebody who over time or throughout the critique group, even just the one session, you start noticing that they're feeling a little bit down or they're starting to get quiet, I start really highlighting, look at all the things you're doing right. Remember, we're just here to help you. So I think that can help.
If I could interrupt for a second, because another thing SK does, I have the honor and privilege of having her as a critique partner. She's phenomenal. Another thing that she does that I love, and I've been trying to incorporate more into my own critique, is I wouldn't even say for me, and maybe that's just because we've got thick skins with each other, we're just a little bit more brutal because we're familiar with each other and we know we love each other's work. It's not, I wouldn't say it's as much of a ratio as the way that you word your negative, do you see these? Your negative feedback, because like she'll say things, and for me, and she knows me, and so that's helpful. But for example, like if I've massively dropped the ball on something, she'll be like, no, you can do better. And for me, it's like the second she says that, and that's my type of person, which is another thing, just getting to know the people you're critiquing. But she knows for me that if she says like, you are better than this, then I'm not sitting there going, oh, I dropped the ball. He's monologuing. My villain is monologuing again. I'm sitting there going, you're right. I'm better than this. I can do this. And it's like she words it in a way that makes me excited to take that feedback and go do good things. And I think that's something that I just appreciate so much in the way that she critiques me. And something I've been trying to incorporate too is the way that I word my feedback.
And to be clear, I do not tell people, hey, you're better than this if I don't vote them well. Don't do that.
And that's fair. I get made fun of for my eyebrows all the time.
I
Because
spent a huge time writing about eyebrows.
Do
We
you have
talked about
waggly eyebrows? I had
I
a
well,
that everybody's eyebrows waggled.
yes, I had a really big obsession with eyebrows, and in one of my
Weird.
first submissions, and I didn't really realize it until Sam over here decided to point it out. Oh, so gracious manner that he does. But now it's become a bit of a thing. So I don't. I think I under eyebrow now. Thank you very much.
You're doing better. You've made huge strides.
Now I just curse too much, but that's fine. That's how I am. But where I was going for in my interruption, and I apologize for interrupting, was
No, absolutely.
how you wording, and that kind of speaks to me just a little. Where when you're wording, to make sure that you're wording it not necessarily in "you did this" or "your words here did something."
Mhm.
It's more.
We lost you.
I don't know. Try not to personalize things, I think is sort of what you're trying to say, Dak. Yeah, she's probably drinking again. Can't rely.
Is that better?
That's
Yeah.
better.
Yes, we can hear you again.
Okay. I have a cat on my lap, and she pressed the button.
You do that.
Blaming it on the cat. But make sure that your wording is not geared towards the author, but geared towards the narrative. So, for example, things like what this says here, this is how I interpreted this, or, and just make direct references to what is there instead of directing well, when you said this is, so taking the you out of it and directing it towards the manuscript as a whole, like as a person, in that context.
So I will say, and Dak can kind of back me up on this, a little shame goes a long way. We've had critiques, and I've had teachers do this to me where if it was something I was consistently messing up, like I love semicolons, and I've been beaten to death over semicolons. Recently and in the past and for years now. And I had a writing instructor who halfway through the critique of my submission just said, this thing is loaded with semicolons. I'm going to stop commenting on them now. And that was pretty much him putting the onus on me. And I had to go through that entire document and find every single semicolon and fix it. So a little bit of shame does go a long way. But obviously you don't want to, completely
beat them down.
Yeah, you don't want to beat these people up. You want them to come back to your group ideally and to grow and contribute.
Yeah, definitely. It's all about reading the person that you're critiquing and sort of balancing that, hey, this is something that you have issues with, but I don't want to just like beat you over the head with it either. With encouragement. So, I mean, one of the things that I do is, especially if I don't know you very well and I'm critiquing your work, I will say a lot of I statements. I feel this way here. I think, that this might happen, or I feel this way towards this character or whatever, just to give you a sense of how the reading experience is for me. And that may not match with other readers, or it may match exactly, who knows. You will after you get your critique back. But I also ask lots and lots of questions rather than, hey, you got to stop starting all your sentences with I'll be like, hey, is there a way that you can switch up the sentence structure, because I'm starting to feel a little jolty.
She does do that,
and
it's fantastic.
So that, I think that hopefully can help to soften the blow, especially if it's something that's happening somewhat regularly.
Yeah, and I think going off that is, I had to get really deep with myself on some of that too. Is that what is the intent of this critique? And my intent is for someone to go on with their writing and do
Yeah.
better. And so if I'm ever wording something in a way that is going to be rude or hurtful, like I try to be very conscious of exactly like we were talking about, just how you word things and how you present things. Um, and I think also when I'm reading too, I like to do a lot of communication ahead of time of what their goals are with the writing. And so, like Sam, I loved what you said earlier too about even things as simple as genre is really going to help, because when you get into genre, that means you're trying to appeal to a certain market. And so, if I'm saying, oh, I'm writing this super dark, gritty, and people are laughing the whole time, and it might not even be that I'm not doing it right. It might just be that I need to reconsider my market. And so I try to kind of take that into perspective and what their goal is, where in their writing process they are, because a first draft, I find, like if I'm taking somebody's early words, I need to be encouraging and a little more gentle and look at things from a broad scope too, because if they're giving me their first draft and I'm like, oh, here's your big plot problems, but also this sentence needs to be fixed, and also you need a comma here, and that's just not helpful at that stage. We don't need to be doing that yet. And so knowing where they are in their process and what their end audience is, so that I can then look at it and say, oh, if you're trying to appeal to an epic fantasy group and you have this big long paragraph talking about the society that we're coming across, that's fine, that's normal. But if you're telling me I'm writing a thriller and you have a big long paragraph describing the scenery, I'm probably gonna check out those industry standards of what the audience is probably looking for and be able to break that up, and then do that according to what stage they're at. First drafts, we're looking for big things like plot holes and does it make sense, and is your character developed enough. And then when if somebody comes to me and says I'm about to query, then we're going to start looking at, are you varying your sentence starters? Do you have any big long paragraphs where they shouldn't be? Or for me, this is me, I hate setting, are we dancing around in white rooms and we're all just floating here? And so, like that's where you need to start getting picky about, what does the sentence look like? Is the comma in the right place? And so being able to sparse that out and not because I've had some people, I've done a lot of peer tutoring too, which is taking people that don't typically write, and some of those people give me stuff. And as a writer and working with people that are very good with words, sometimes I get stuff that I'm like, oh man, like everything, they need to change everything. and so picking and choosing, how can I encourage somebody, how can I give them enough that they can go out and improve and come back and give them more and improve and come back, versus throwing the whole kitchen sink at them all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and it can be, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it can be very overwhelming, especially in the beginning, to throw the whole kitchen sink at them.
Yeah.
I know with an individual who may be newer to the group, there's definitely a lot more positive comments and a lot more context to the critiques and things like that, but as they keep coming back, then we get more technical with their critique, especially, like Ariana said, where they're going and, what draft it is and things like that. What I try to do is give context to my critique. So if I'm saying something's not working, I want to tell the person what I'm seeing and where that disconnect is. For example, like if we're going down the train of crying, for example, and I'm going, well, we're not there yet. I kind of like, this is where we were going and it felt like it stopped too soon. And then the other person can go, I didn't want you to cry, I want you to be mad. And so that way that other person can go, well, how can I make you mad in at what's going on instead of making you want to cry? So a lot of that context of going through and going, well, these 5 points here led us here, and then I felt that it stopped, and this is why. And especially when you're giving that developmental feedback, so that we know where you see the story going as the critiquer, but also as the writer going, so they can identify the points where you started to diverge from where they were intending the story and narrative going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I think that one thing that we have each sort of slightly touched upon, but I think that we need to just say it outright, even though we shouldn't have to. But a critique group is not the place or time or ever for any sort of personal attacks. All of your
Never.
critiques
Hmm.
need to be addressed to the writing and never, ever the person for any reason in any situation.
Absolutely.
It's a place for kindness and encouragement, I think. The right ones, good critique groups.
Yes.
But and critique group also is a safe place to fail. I think we kind of forget that
Yes.
we're not here to just build you up and just be the positives. We're here to, no offense, knock you down a little bit and go, these are the things that you need to work on. And I think as a person going in, you may or may not be aware of what your weaknesses are as a writer, and a lot of the critique that other people will give you will show you what those weaknesses are. So being aware of that, and having that thick skin to accept the feedback, but also as the critiquer, um, making sure that you are balancing the positive and the negative, but not neglecting to say the negative. We are here to pat everybody back on the end, but it is a place to fail. And Sam says it all the time, fail forward, at least fail but fail trying, so that you can get it out on the page. We can sit in the group, and a lot of times we will spend 20 minutes going through one scene to help that author kind of conceptualize what's going on and where the blocks and maybe and the improvements are, so that they come away feeling, okay, I know what to do with this now.
Yeah, that's super important for them to feel empowered.
Yes.
Because that's kind of the whole point. But I mean, you were just talking about sort of like workshopping it or brainstorming solutions, and that's it's something that I don't usually suggest solutions in a doc when I'm commenting, because I don't want to necessarily steer you wrong. If we're in like a roundtable discussion, or we're workshopping your scene and you have no idea what to do, absolutely you should have plenty of ideas to suggest. Not every idea is going to work for every writer or for every scene, even if even if you as the critiquer think it's the most brilliant idea ever. Because the person who's writing, that's the person who is ultimately responsible for what suggestions to keep and what suggestions to throw out. And they have to consider their genre, they have to consider their tone, they have to consider their writing style and their own voice. And that's something that is really hard to take into account when you're critiquing and it's not your piece.
Yes. And
Absolutely.
I think I liked the way Sam worded it earlier. Having one in the chamber doesn't mean you're firing it all over the place. It means if you say, this sentence isn't working, this is confusing, or have you thought of varying your sentence starters? And somebody comes back and says, well, how do I do that? Or I thought I was doing this really clearly. Can you help me? Then you're prepared, and and when they can come back, then you can offer those suggestions. But yeah, I agree with SK that a lot of times we can hold back more suggestions and put out more of our response and our experience than trying to rewrite it for them and make it sound like I would say it, because we're different. And that's what's beautiful about telling stories, is that we're all going to tell them very differently. And so
And a lot of my mentor actually told me that I will tell you what needs to be fixed, and I can give you a dozen suggestions how, but 9 times out of 10 I'm not going to be the one that's going to have that idea on how to fix it. That's going to come from the author. And that the critique group is good for telling you what's wrong or what needs to be fixed, but not necessarily how to fix it.
Yeah. And not robbing them of the opportunity. And like Sam said too, I feel the same when I go through and look at something people have done wrong, to take that time to grow for myself and be selfish in my own writing, and to look at it and say, how would I fix this?
Yeah.
And that might be different. And I think if you are constantly giving suggestions on how to fix, you rob that writer of the opportunity to grow themselves. Because if you say, you did this wrong and here's how it goes, they don't get to go back and go, you know, and we all hate that moment where we're like, I'm stuck with this and I don't know what to do. But those are the moments of biggest growth, is to be able to overcome that on your own, not to be spoon fed. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I want to jump in though, because you said that you mentioned that you feel selfish when you sit back and you're like, okay, how would I fix this problem? And I don't think that's selfish at all. I think that's just you focusing on growing as a writer. And every writer in a critique group should be looking at these problems and looking at what ways they themselves would fix it. That doesn't mean that's how it's fixed in this particular case, but having that thought process and thinking through that problem solving, that's going to really, really help you, which is one reason why it's so important when you're critiquing somebody else's work to point out those things that you see. You know, don't be shy about, oh, I'm not good enough to critique the so-and-so's work, I'm not worthy. You are absolutely worthy to talk about how this piece made you feel, you know. And those things are valuable information, and looking at the problems that you see and looking at how to fix those are going to be hugely important to growing your own skill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I think that's a good point to move into the next question, because you guys mentioned reading experience. You talked about so many things. So tell me the difference between critiquing groups, beta readers, and a critiquing partner.
Okay, so
We're waiting for definitions here.
Yeah.
So critique groups are going to go over a smallish section of your story. It might be 1,000 words. It might be 2,000. It could be 5,000 words. It's probably not going to be the entire book. They're just going to go over a segment, and there is probably going to be a wait time between that segment and the next segment that they get, which means that that's time for information about your story to be lost. So you're not looking for necessarily a cohesive bird's eye view of your entire plot from a critique group. Sometimes that can happen, but it's not something that you're necessarily always going to get. With a beta reader, they're going to read your story like a reader, and they're going to tell you their thoughts from what they read. They're not going to read it, you know, oh, I can only read 2,000 words today, and then I have to set it aside for 7 days, because that's not the experience that you're going to ultimately want either. So that's something that is important to get that perspective on as well. And then your critique partners are also going to come at it reading it like a reader's going to, but they're going to come at it also with the experience of being a writer themselves, and preferably being approximately the same level as you, so they know what you're doing. They are experienced with the same sort of struggles that you're having, and a lot of times CPs will go over the same book multiple times.
And I think what's important too when you're establishing relationships with these different people is that, I mean, SK just provided great explanations of kind of what each of those is, but don't ever assume that everybody has the same vision of what a beta reader is versus a critique partner versus a critique group. Always kind of go in with that communicate. I'm going to harp on this a million times. Communicate. But, you know, go in and ask somebody what their expectation is, because I know I've asked people to beta read for me before. And my beta readers, I love a good mix of people that just read and don't write it all. Right? I had people come to me before and say, oh, well, I can't beta read because I don't know grammar very well. And so to be able to not go in and say, I would like you to be this definition for me, and instead say, hey, would you like to read my book and give me feedback about how you experienced that? And then, in critique partners too, every once in a while, I've had for myself, I tend to give pretty intensive critiques. Like I do edit, I do know grammar. And so I can tell you where the comma goes and stuff like that. But and every once in a while I've had a critique swap, which is why I personally always recommend a first chapter swap when you're starting out with somebody new, is because sometimes you do that swap and they send it back to you and go, it was really great and I liked it. And they did more of a beta reader, like, oh, I really liked that so and so did this. And I'm like, okay, well, I spent 2 hours reading these couple of pages you sent me, and I, combed through for this, and this. And sometimes you're just not at that same, like, they thought it was something different. A lot of people I find think that critique just means that we're going to trade versus that it's going to be one-sided. And so so establishing that, I've been, when I first started actually doing this, I definitely got burned a lot of times where I was giving a lot more, and I was giving a lot more than I was getting back. And I'm sure there's people that have the opposite, where maybe they give something, they get it back and they go, oh, I didn't give as much as I thought I should have. And so to be able to have that conversation ahead of time of, hey, I know I said I needed beta readers. What does that mean to you? Or like, this is actually what I'm looking at. Are you still okay to do this for me? Or we're establishing a critique partner relationship. I give compliment sandwiches. I'm not a compliment sandwich person. I'm terrible. I'm like, no, I'll just react and I'll try to say everything nice and bubbly, and hopefully you'll take it good. And I'm upfront with that ahead of time, that like, this is how I do it. Are you still okay going forward, or am I going to tear a hole in your soul that I'll have to stitch up later? So yeah, I think that's an important piece of these definitions as well, is that sometimes they mean different things to different people, and to just always lay the groundwork ahead of time.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. Definitely communication all the way around, from the beginning to the middle to the end, even if it's, this is exactly what I'm looking for, having a check sheet or something like that of your expectations, because you maybe one person can give a certain set of expectations and meet those, and then somebody else can fill in the rest.
Yeah.
Everybody is at different skill levels, or just at time constraints, because beta reading and and critiquing do take a lot of time. I mean, some people will go, I read everything twice, because you let things sit for a few days. Other people just read one right through and give you their initial reactions, and that's what they can do. So definitely setting up those expectations, deadlines as well, as to when you can expect certain things, open communication of, hey, how you doing? Do you need any help? Are there any questions? Because sometimes the other person, like Ariana was saying, well, I didn't give back what I wanted, what I thought was appropriate, given now that I have my critique back. So those kinds of back and forth prior to, um, before you actually exchange that first chapter, as well as, this is when I'm going to get it back, this is how I'm going to get it back. If you're going to do track changes or not track changes. I know some individuals do not like track changes. Other people swear by it because, that's the way that they think. So just making sure everything from the medium you're going to use, to the communication style you're going to use, to how that critique is going to be given. I preface everything with, I'm an asshole, so please don't expect me to be nice and bubbly. I'm going to be very direct.
Very good.
And that is not a lie. I am not rude and I'm not mean, but I have been that person that goes, you can do better than this. I've seen
And
this.
I like that. And I think that's important to know too, is that when you're critiquing, you be you, because everybody needs different things. Some people
Yes.
need somebody who's compliment sandwichy. Like, I realized that when I did some critique matchups over Twitter, that they had this like style guide, and I was like, oh my gosh, people want different. And I thought, well, everybody wants somebody that's going to be mean and rip their stuff apart. That's what I want. Isn't that what everybody wants? And
Right?
it's
Yes.
not. It's not. And I know some people that are like, well, who would want somebody who's mean and rips their stuff apart? And I was like, me,
right?
Send
Yes.
them over here.
Yes. I love my yeah. I love my mentor, because she would rip everything apart, and she's like, I want you to cry for 3 days and then call me up and we'll talk about it. Because
Yes.
that's when, if you don't if you're not straight and to the point, for me, I don't learn, so knowing the person's learning style is also very, very helpful, because that's also how they learn, is how they're going to communicate. um so definitely, I am the person that kind of wants to be, I don't want to waste your time, so I'm going to give you the critique. I'm going to short, fluffy, maybe I'll add a smiley face on the end, but that's it, and we run straight through. Because I don't mean to be, I don't think fluffy,
Yeah.
so in that communication where you have with that other person, you'll learn if they are a fluffy person or not, and just kind of being aware that the person that you communicate with will be the same person that writes those critiques.
Mhm.
you know
And I think that, one of the advantages of swapping small little portions first, with a potential beta reader or a critique partner, is that not only can you see compatibility with all of these other super important things, but you can also see maybe you just don't like their genre or tone, and you're just like, I am not going to enjoy this. I am not going to be the best reader for you. Maybe you hate horror and you just somehow missed that this is a horror piece, maybe you hate epic fantasy.
How dare you? How dare you?
or maybe you just don't like them. Let's be honest, you have to fit as personalities, or it's not going to be beneficial. If I can't handle you ragging me about my eyebrows, we're not going to be friends.
It's true. It's true.
It's so
Better just
true. And
being
I
an
had
asshole.
somebody write back once and say, like, you write too pretty. I just want you to get down to it. And I was like, it's just
That
not
ain't
a good relationship, because that's what I'm most proud of in my writing. And so,
Mhm.
and I think just also knowing that it is okay to just not like somebody, or to just not like
Yes.
the way they write. And in groups, it gets a little bit different, because you all have to be happy together as a cohesive group, but especially one-on-one. If you're not a good fit, you're not a good fit. And that's not saying you're a bad person. It's just saying this relationship isn't going to be, because I don't give good critique when I don't like somebody's writing. If I just don't like their writing style, then it's a waste of my time and theirs, because I'm also not giving, like, it was funny. I remember one time with my first book, I sent out to 20 beta readers, and this is just who I am. And then I graphed their responses and made like pie graphs and all sorts of fun things, because I wanted to see where things were probably opinion, and where things were like, no, there's definitely a problem here. And I had one girl who I let read it because I worked with her and she was excited. And I did a survey beforehand and said, what do you like to read the most? What, those sorts of things. And she did not read my genre. She actually disliked my genre. And I made the mistake of saying, I'm going to give it to her anyway, because I like her as a person and we get along. And she was really excited to read this. And her feedback, it was hilarious. When I graphed it, I had to feedback because it was an outlier everywhere. Everyone was like, we really love that you did this. And she's like, yeah, but you did this. And it got kind of boring when you were explaining the science of the powers. And I was like, it's science fiction. Like, what do you mean you didn't like the science? But that's the thing, is that, like, really in the end, probably, there are people you can say, just read it, enjoy it. You don't have to give it back to me. We don't ever have to talk about it. But, just knowing that if you somebody who hates your genre, their feedback is going to be not
colored
the best.
that way.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's good too, if you are in that situation, to say, like, I'm willing to read your romance novel, and sorry, this is just me. I have nothing against romance, but I don't like romance novels. And if you have like fluffy scenes where they're just being like cloying, I'm gonna like be barfing in the background, because I'm just not that person. And so that's straight up romance piece to read. I'm not gonna give you the right feedback, because I'm not your audience, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
All right.
not at all.
I think this is. Do you want to add one last thing before I move to the last question?
Yes, if I could.
Yeah, go for it.
So going along with this, sometimes with critique groups, you're going to be in a group with people that you may not know. But even if you hate romance because you're Ariana, and you just happen to be stuck in a critique group, and you have to read somebody's romance, don't mess with their tone or their genre or their voice.
Or their
don't
style.
do it. respect their choices, their how they write. Don't change, because that's not going to be helpful for them. If okay, so I really like fantasy and epic and science fiction and all that. So if you have somebody who writes like Tolkien, and you're somebody who writes like Isaac Asimov, right? These things are not going to mesh well.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that their audience isn't going to like it, you know? And
So
you
true.
can give them critique while doing your best to adjust for this is the audience that they're going for, and this is what that audience expects.
Yeah, and that comes back to two things. One, not taking it personally, also not personally putting your person into what you're reading, you know, and distancing yourself there, but also, you know, growing as a person to say, I can still comment on the blocking and the amount of setting, for example, that seems to make sense in what they are saying. You know, there are basics that, you know, don't address style and tone and things like that. Or you can and go, well, this is inconsistent with whatever you already have. I don't like it,
Yes.
but you leave the I don't like it out, but you know, you can
Yes.
still spot the inconsistencies and you can still you know, comment on the blocking and the setting and the clarity of certain things that are going to be cross genre, you know.
All right.
And
I
I just
think
want to, I know Critty's trying to make us move on, but I just want to agree with SK 2 seconds. Please never critique someone's voice. That's
Yes.
just because that is the beauty of all of us. And you just don't need to, that's my one rule. Don't do that. Take it away, Critty. Take it from me.
all right. I gotta take it. Okay, how do you run and
Moving on.
a critique effectively?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, how do you run and moderate a critique group effectively?
Oh, snap. We're jumping to that. Okay.
This is
You're in
Sam's
my
wheelhouse.
Yes,
Let's
go
do it.
Sam.
All right. All right. Iron Fist Velvet Glove. All right. So I got three things here. I'm trying to run through these, but just some background. I used to be a special ed and general ed teacher. So I take a lot of what I used to do in the classroom, whether it was with 40 kids, 4 or 1. And I pretty much just translated all of that right into my critique group. I'd been in, like I'd mentioned, a bunch of really mediocre groups, and I even tried one that was pretty mediocre myself before I finally figured it all out. So kind of when you're actually in the session, you're sitting down with everybody. Actually, you know, let's do it the other way. Let's talk about process first. The first thing is you need to have really clear rules and guidelines. This is just like teaching a class. Whenever my kids came into the classroom, on the board, they knew the expectations. By the end of the day, you'll know how to do blank, whatever that was. So on the meetup page that we organize everything through, everything, no matter where you go, the style guidelines, the submission deadlines, the critique deadlines, everything is just repeated and reiterated throughout the document, throughout the page. And then on the Google Drive itself, it's the same thing. You'll see all of the aspects of your responsibilities throughout the page. So I had somebody the other day say, I didn't know that we had a submission deadline. I said, well, there are about 3 different places you'll find it where on your way to RSVPing for the meeting this Sunday. So if that happens, it's kind of on you. Not that I'm trying to take all the accountability off myself, but I want to give my writers every single chance they can to know their business. And I think that the really cool thing about having everything on Google Drive is that I get to spy on everyone, and I love it. I get to see, because if you've ever used Google Drive, if you have a shared document, we have a whole shared folder with subfolders and subfolders within it. You get to see when people are making changes to their submissions and changes to their critiques, or when they've started a critique, all kinds of stuff. So I know right up until the minute that blank hasn't even started their critique the day of our meeting until an hour before the meeting. So I'm going to have a talk with that person, and we're going to start talking about their work ethic. So it's a really cool thing about doing a digital submission format that I really encourage people to adopt. Another thing is we just rolled out, and this was Dakota's idea, and I can't take any credit for it. It's just something I'd thought about for a while, was having a primer, aka a submission and critique guideline. You should, with every submission, you should have everything from the submission's word count, the POV, the tense, the genre, everything should already be established for you. And the same goes for critiques. So what we did just recently was we standardized the critique guidelines. They're down to 10 questions now. Those questions deal with all the kind of elements of style, everything from how the prose sound, the developmental edits, the pacing, etc. But if there are extra things like blocking, anything like that, you get to address it then and there. But we're always trying to keep everything in check. And one of the things I do, and this is something I learned from an anthropology professor, I majored in anthro as my bachelor's. I have a master's in education, but word count's really important. And one of our professors made us write a really intense essay using only, I guess you'd say, only like 300 to 500 words. And it was for a really intense, like informative paper. So I had to become really economic with my use of words. And I have that same kind of imposition on my group. We have a 2,500 word limit, and some people chafe at it and some people don't have a problem with it. But I find that it really encourages the economy of speech, the economy of the written word. And it also helps us reduce and cut off a lot of extra fat. That does kind of cut into setting at times, but when I do critiques, I always preface by saying, there wasn't much setting in your submission, but I know that we have a 2,500 word limit. Just recently, though, we decided we'd make exceptions, though. So you have like a really long chapter, but that whole chapter is essential to, like, say, a plot twist. We've now decided that if it's 4,000, 5,000 words, you can do that. And I was the first person to do it, because I'm the boss and I do whatever the hell I want in my group. So, but the same stuff applies, just like when you're talking about doing a critique, is knowing the context and then giving people time to understand what your work is about. So I always advise people put a primer at the beginning of your submission, just within that submission guideline, saying like, here's what the whole story is about and here's where we left off. So even new members will have a chance to at least glean some idea of what we're going to be talking about. And again, just like I mentioned earlier, we decide what we're going to divulge to our readers and to our colleagues. And if I have a great plot twist and the story I'm working on has multiple plot twists, I'm not going to tell you about any of them because I need this to be a surprise. But if 3 sessions ahead of that plot twist, you go, Sam, I already know he's actually that guy. Crap. Then I need to sit back and think and go, okay, so I did something way back that I need to fix. And then I'm going to ask that person, like, how can I improve on that? So that's the process. You're actually sitting at the table now. You're managing the session. This is you. You're the boss. How do you go about doing it? The first thing is establishing the order. I always go to the left. I'm left-handed, so we always go to the left. So wherever I'm sitting, if Dakota is the first person who submitted for the week and she's sitting to my left, she is the first person we're going to critique. And then the person most immediate to her left is the first person who's going to critique her. And we go all the way around. And then we go to the next person to the left who submitted, and we go all the way around. And we repeat that. And we have a 3 submission cap on each meeting. And it works out really well. I think 3 is kind of the magic number for us. I've seen people do more. I've seen people do less. I find that kind of holy trinity seems to work out really well for us. I had a teacher who said, when it's time for you to be critiqued, you're in a glass booth and you can't talk. I always kind of chafed at that. I thought that context, again, is really important. So our group, because we critique ahead of time and you've had days to digest everything, we really encourage crosstalk because that's when all the really good ideas start to happen. And so what we'll do is say that, like, hey, here's something I really liked and I didn't really get this part. And then Dakota's going to butt in and go, actually, what I was trying to say was this. And I go, oh, you know what? That's really cool. You know what we should do on top of that? and then we start generating ideas. And from that point, it's gravy. So a lot of that kind of crosstalk, not a lot of it, obviously, but some we want to encourage.
Yeah, and definitely not
yeah,
just between the author and the
Yeah.
critiquer, but
Round table.
the whole table. Because a lot of people will ask, well, why critique in person if we've already done their critique and I've given it.
Right.
But I think what a lot, like Sam said, a lot of that magic happens on that table, because when we start talking, then other things kind of come out, and we do have very, very vast different of opinions. And what is great is that every single person in our group has a different skill set, a different background, a different experience. So once we start talking around in circles, we piggyback off of each other, and those ideas get deeper and deeper, and then the author can sit there and go and start kind of connecting the dots in their own way to make their own suggestions as to what everybody is interpreting and how they can make those changes, and if they can make those changes in their work.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
That's like one of the coolest parts about critiquing in a group is, as a writer, you get to see, okay, one person hated it and 5 people liked it. Okay, so what happened there? Is this something that you can fix? Is this something that you should fix? Or is it just this person doesn't like this thing,
Well, you have to look at that statistical significance too. I mean, if you think about it just in terms of numbers, if one person, disagrees with your choice, you can kind of wave that off and decide, not all critiques are mandates, but if 2 or more people start to say the same thing, then you need to look at it and look at the statistical significance of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I've got more stuff, but I know we're kind of on a time crunch, so I'm just going to wrap it up super fast. Okay. I think it's really important to also, if you're going to have a writer's group, mix it up. Everybody's doing critiques after 1 week after another. So here's some ideas that I've generated over time that have helped kind of mix things up. So we do write-ins, which is exactly what it sounds like. We sit down at the end of the month, we just have a write-in, dedicated time to just sit there and get nothing else but writing done. We do workshops. I have one called Round Blobbin, which is a series of writing prompts we keep passing around. That one's kind of fun. We do novel doctors. We'll be doing that at the end of the month, where we bring in problems, things that we're really struggling with in our novel, and we find out solutions to them. So we bring examples and say, like, I just don't know what to do with this character, or I can't get to this. I don't know how to get from A to B. I need help with that. But we also do book clubs. People who have manuscripts that are done, but they're probably never going to do anything with. We put the whole thing up there. And then we have a resources folder, which I love because it's got classes online or in person, articles about critiquing and writing. We have a whole grammar worksheet. I mean, pretty much a primer on how to do grammar gooder. And then we have podcasts. We do anything about publishing, writing query letters, stuff like that. And then writing assistants like Grammarly and Scrivener and stuff like that. So I think it's really important, if you're running a group, that you just treat it like you just treat it the way you'd like to experience it, which is, I don't want to do critiques week after week. I mean, I've been doing this for a couple of years now. Like, it's tiring. I'd like a break periodically. So to stop every once in a while and just do a write-in, that's great. I love that, because then I get to have the writing experience with my colleagues. And then if I have questions, I can just tap them on the shoulder real quick, say, hey, what do you think of this? They go, oh, that's a great idea, or oh, that's shit. And then they just go back to their thing, and I go back to my thing and cry a little bit more.
I've learned so much. I've learned so much, and I'm excited to join the critique. Can book bloggers join?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Why not?
Yes.
Okay, this has been such a lively discussion. Any last thing that you want to add before we open it up to our audience for questions?
I think the only thing I will say is that each critique group will be different, because each group is made up of different individuals. What works for some may not work for others. Sam and Sam, the one I do with Sam is once a week. The one I do online is monthly roundtables. So it is formatted a little differently, essentially though with the same thing, but without that in-person component. Um, but just if you are looking to start a critique group or join a critique group, um, definitely be flexible. Keep that communication and those expectations open with the individuals that are in your group or will be in your group.
Yeah.
And feel free to change things as they go. Don't be afraid to say this sucks, but I'm going to keep going because this is how we started it.
Yeah.
Feel free to change those rules, change those guidelines, implement new and different things, because if you run a critique group, your critique group will change. You will not have the same individuals in the beginning that you do it, today.
Yeah.
So those rules and those guidelines, we didn't have, for example, the Wednesday night submission guideline we did before, but once we had up to 5 or 6 more members, then that became necessary. So don't sit there and go, well, I need all of these rules, because you may not. You may need stricter rules because, well, we do, because we have up to 12 people at a time that want to participate. So those rules keep the structure in the individuals that come in and out. Whereas if you have a dedicated group of 2 or 3 that are only those 2 and 3, your rules and guidelines may be different. So just keep all of that in mind, that there is no right way to be a critique group. And there's no wrong way. It's whatever works for everybody in that group.
I think it's a really good point. And just to add to that, I mean, Dakota, you can totally vouch for this. Our group started with far fewer rules than it has now.
Yes.
But all those rules have been very gradual and organic and necessary, it seems like, at this point. And I think they're great. And I've appreciated all the feedback I get from people like yourself and other members of our group. The only thing I want to add is that I think it's a misconception that people go into critique groups, and because they've received a number of critiques, I'm kind of being hypocritical here, but you get statistically significant number of people saying, I had a problem with this. But if it's your baby and you really believe in it, and you know that what you're doing is actually awesome and it works and it's got convention and pros and everything right there, then the hell with those people. I mean, if you find something that just works, and I had this happen a week ago, where nobody understood this one thing, but I knew they didn't understand it because they didn't have a good grasp of history. And I write a lot of historical stuff. So I just ignore their comments, and it's fine. Not every critique is a mandate. You have to decide whether or not what people are telling you is, to sound woke, here is your truth. You have to decide whether or not it actually is the case. And if it really does hold water, then decide how you want to change it. Just because somebody tells you the blocking doesn't work, you need to have him on the left side, not the right side. You go, well, maybe he's behind him. You don't have to take it word for word.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe the blocking may be off, but how to fix it in whatever is definitely your own choice.
Yeah, you don't want to lose your own style and tone, and it's really easy to let a lot of people influence it. And this happens to me when I read really great books, is I start to write like those people, outside of my own flavor and tone. So I think it's really important, whether you're reading something really great or you're getting critiques that are really outside of your realm or outside of your vision, to decide whether or not they actually hold water.
Exactly. And in the end, it's your work, so you decide what to do with it. And if you tell us to all go kick rocks, then that's fair.
All right.
Yeah,
And
sorry.
Ashley?
I've just gotten
Go for
very
it.
protective of voice and style and tone.
Yeah.
And it's not going to do any favors if you try to make everybody happy. Some people are just not going to like your book.
It ain't
And
gonna
that's
happen.
going to be okay.
Go check out Goodreads. Look at the range of opinions on the exact same thing of published best-selling fiction, and you'll see exactly what's happening in your critique group.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Perfect is the enemy of done. Just
Absolutely.
like Terry Pratchett said, the first draft is just you telling yourself the story. And if people don't get the story yet, that's fine. They're just looking at the bones. They haven't gotten the flesh and the skin yet. So
Yeah.
true.
Right, Critty.
All right. I think
Finish us.
we had a really good discussion, and you actually covered one of the questions that I had, which was on our document. Yeah, there will be links to critiquing groups in the chat. So our audience, if you want to go join one right now, you totally can. And I will take questions soon.
Thank you.
And now we wait.
Now we wait.
I have to run, but this was exciting. This is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked hearing about it. Now I want to go start a critique group, except, you know, Corona, so I'm not allowed.
You should join mine.
Yeah,
We're
I'll
all
have to
just
do an
gonna
online
wash
one.
our hands before critique group. It'll be fine.
Right. That's important.
The
The
social
writing
gathering
will
room
protect
for
us.
people.
Writing is the immunization against it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Okay, anyway.
I've been reading up on this and listening to podcasts. The technical term is social distancing. So that's why having a hybrid writers group where we can do it all in Google if need be. I'm doing my part. Are you?
Oh.
Mine's all online, so.
All social
That's fine.
distance.
You're doing a better job than I am. I did the digital group. I just didn't. I was in various groups where we'd show up and the person would bring in, 7 or 8 copies of their work, each one 12 pages long. We'd all tear through it with a red pen.
And read.
Yes.
In one of those.
I hate those.
We got 5 minutes to digest something. Write down our comments hurriedly. They can barely read them because we're in such a hurry. You send them back to them, and half of those things just get tossed. So I just hate wasting paper. I was raised in Alaska with trees, man. We don't do that out there. So if I can help out even just by keeping it all digital, I don't care if Google has all of our data. I mean, the worst thing they're going to do is steal a lot of fabulous writing.
And this is how robots will be writers.
Right.
Yeah.
But those read as you fucking critique ones are really popular out here, like so popular. I don't understand it.
That's the really
that would be
bad one I
hard
was
too,
a
because
part
like
of.
the people are right there. Like for me, it's easier for me to be like, this is really not working when I don't see you. So
Right?
when nobody is
watching you and you're trying to like, do I need to force a giggle here so that they feel better about their lives?
Yeah.
And Coda's like, no.
No, we don't do
Tell
that.
them this isn't fun. This joke will flop. In my face. No
Yes.
amusement.
Yes.
Anyway, I hear my baby crying. I gotta run.
All right.
All
Bye.
right.
Sure.
I'll see you guys somewhere. Bye.
Have a good one.
Laters.
Bye.
Laters.
Good.
Bye.